Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there. The most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also, we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to do just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Shane Coppin. Shane is Chief Executive Officer of PMSA, Presbyterian and Methodist Schools Association. Welcome to the podcast, Shane.
Thank you, Jono. Good to be here.
First of all, can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do at PMSA?
Okay, so the PMSA is an organisation that's been in existence for a bit over 100 years, about 103, 104 years. We have a history of running four very high quality independent private schools, all aligned with the Uniting and Presbyterian Church in Brisbane. So we're the owners of the Brisbane Boys College, Somerville House, Clayfield College, and recently the Sunshine Coast Grammar School on the Sunshine Coast. So we've had a long-standing history. Over that period, we tens of thousands of students through our schools, very long history in regards to being one of the leading education sources in the Brisbane area. And so the
Yeah,
role of the
fantastic.
PMSA is as the governing body or the owner of the organisation, and the role that we now play is to support and facilitate the growth and development of our schools, and to also look at opportunities that will help them grow into the future and the future of education in the longer term, but also new opportunities where we may be able to expand our product and our resources or even our campuses into new areas.
Fantastic. Thank you for unpacking that. So to get started, I'd love to find out about your story. Even let's start by going back to your childhood, growing up. What were the moments, or the themes in that season that really shaped you to become the leader you are today, Shane?
Look, I grew up predominantly in the bottom of Victoria, so I was a bit of a country. I was born out of Melbourne, and we lived down south part of Melbourne, down the Red Hill Balnarring area, and then we moved across towards a little place called Timboon, tiny little place, 800 person town, dairy farming area down near Port Campbell and Warrnambool. But I guess and we moved there when I was about 8. But from an early age, what I remember is being passionate about sport, being very heavily involved in sport, and participating in that. But I spent a lot of time, I guess, we had a property of about 100 acres, just exploring and creating, stories in my mind and playing games on weekends and just exploring through the property, but equally playing sport. So maybe when I reflect back some of that time about, trying to find journeys and create opportunities or visualize things in your mind, perhaps that's led me a little bit towards my leadership journey. And then when I was about 16, I moved and went to the US for a year and spent time with a family in Arkansas and finished my Year 12 studies in the US. And that was probably a point in my life where I really grew and became quite independent, because I was away from home, away from family. Back then, there was no mobile phones, so if you wanted to communicate, you still did it. You had to record on a tape and send it back via normal mail, and phone calls were horrendous prices, and we might have one of those every now and then. But it encouraged me to become very independent, I guess, from an early age, and to learn to make decisions that and make judgments from that age. So I haven't often thought about the question that you asked, but I think when I do now, thinking back, a number of those steps set me on a path where I became responsible for my own decisions, had to form my own outlooks and make views, and also at the same time get a sense of independence and resilience to the challenges that I faced.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. As you grew a bit older, do you remember your first leadership opportunity? It might have been when you were still very young, might have been a bit older, where you were managing a group of people, or you were leading a project or starting something on your own. Do you remember what that first sort of leadership opportunity was?
Yeah, I think. Look, I always when I was sport, I always and I played AFL and I played basketball and tennis predominantly. I also played some squash, but I very much wanted to get in, and my parents managed a sporting centre, and I was always keen to get involved and work as part of that. And I would end up, as I grew, having shifts in that organisation from a young age, and just trying to take some leadership response. I'm not sure if I would have said it was leadership at the time. I think it was about taking responsibility for helping support and manage that business and help my parents in the operation of that business. Then obviously on having a farm and working in that environment, you also take responsibility. So I'm not sure if I thought it was always leadership at that time, but possibly a lot more around trying to become a bit more responsible and a contributor. The one example that I can think, when I was my first year of university, so I wasn't that young, but I was probably 18 at the time, and I came back from university and I decided that I wanted to run a basketball camp, and it was part of my fundraising to sort of get myself through the holidays and to prepare for the next year of university. So I took on the role to create, and this was when we were living in Mildura, but create an opportunity to devise a week-long camp for kids, market that camp, manage all aspects, get other coaches involved, and manage all the catering and the bits and pieces. And in some ways, I think that is a leadership piece. But I think maybe over the time, all the pieces of just trying to organize things, take responsibility, create opportunities, all leads towards ultimately becoming a leader and traits of leadership.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I think so many leaders look back, and often the things that really shape us as leaders aren't necessarily things that at the time we realize are leadership opportunities, but they really do shape us. And I think it should encourage us with our own young people and young leaders, is that sometimes giving people leadership opportunities doesn't have to be your stereotypical here's a chance to lead. It can really be, anything can be a leadership lesson, and any project, like you said, where I love how you mentioned the family sort of business and those sort of things, that there are so many leadership lessons available there. And for us in work, in the teams we lead, if we can just sort of look at things a little bit left field and just have a different perspective, there's often things around what we're doing now, or different projects or different working groups we can create, that can really give people who may not have a job title of leader a chance to take something on, lead a group of people, even just step out into leadership for the first time.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you on that. I think I often use a term that I don't think you can understand what you don't experience, or you need to experience to understand, either which way. But I think I think as we progress over the years and you get to a position and you're regarded as a leader, which is really nice to be regarded in that sense, I don't think I ever set about to become a leader. I think I just wanted to experience and immerse myself in the opportunities that presented, and through that you learn, and by learning, hopefully then you can share what you learned with others, and traits like that become one of leadership. And I think you always need to be willing to back yourself, but also equally be willing to be vulnerable enough that you might make a mistake, but trust yourself to fix that mistake and learn from that mistake. And I think throughout life, if you continue to take that mindset, that helps develop, what I guess people judge now as traits and a sense of leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of fast forwarding from there, we talked a little bit about that time in university. As you think about your career so far, and you think about that sort of season, university and post-university, and do you remember any particularly sort of pivotal moments in those times that have really shaped you into the leader you are today? Anything in that sort of the earlier part of your career, Shane?
Look, yeah, I've always. I came out of university, and I worked in sport for a couple of years, looking after a sporting centre of all places in Mildura, squash centre, back in the days when squash centres were quite large, and swimming pool and all those pieces. And that was a really interesting experience. I was pretty young. I was with my my wife at the time, and we were managing this complex, working long hours. But you're sort of thrust into a business, and you spend a lot of your time in that business. And then I moved back into Canberra, and I ended up working for volleyball at a period, and then I moved across later on into basketball. And where I'm going with the journey in basketball, I was quite young, what I would say pretty young. At the time I was 26. I'd gone in there working in a sports administrator role. The organisation had managing director and other staff and a board, and basketball was the sport that I was very passionate about. I was a coach, so I guess throughout my whole career from sort of that 17, 18, probably 18 through to that time, I'd been very passionate about being a basketball coach and coaching at the highest level. So I guess in some ways that's a leadership trait you're trying to take on. I really enjoyed leading teams and trying to improve and get the best out of a group of people in performance. But where I'm going with this story is that at that age, it was recognised by the then board, and I was offered an opportunity to step up from this junior role after being in the job for about a year or so to
Yeah.
actually taking on the general manager's role with that organisation. And I was only like 26, 27. I had a young son at the time, and and I jumped at the opportunity, and it was probably the managing director that had been. They just shifted him to the side, which probably wasn't, in fairness, the right decision for him or for me. But I jumped at the decision and took the opportunity to become the leader of that organisation while he was moved to the side. It was difficult. It was challenging. I don't sort of suggest anyone that that's the ideal way through, but that pivotal moment from coming from there to trying to lead an organisation at such a young age really put me into a whole new mindset, and I became very responsible for so many others, whilst also managing the dynamics of the previous leader sitting on the side and working with a new board. So when I think back, that is probably one of those pivotal moments where I took the opportunity to step up and back myself into what
Yeah.
was a pretty challenging role at that time. But
Wow.
I think you need to be willing as a leader. You sort of just have that. You just back yourself and you say, I can do this. And but what you learn through that process is enormous. And I've had a few of those moments through my career when I think back that I've stepped into an area and you just learn enormously and you grow through a period of time. And I think that's the pivotal point where I transitioned from being probably more just what I would have said at the time was an administrator and someone on that journey to stepping into a whole new leadership role.
Yeah, I love that because because so many, all of us have the perfect script, don't we? Oh, it'd be great. That's the role I'd love next. And everyone I talk to, one thing, there's a number of patterns that have come out of the podcast that I've really enjoyed watching. One thing is no one's path has really been linear. Everyone talks about how and for you, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking, wow, what a challenging role to take on this role where not only do you have a board, but then you've got the leader who was in the role previously sitting there beside you, and that's oh wow, that's fraught with challenges. What were your biggest learning? Like, what were the biggest lessons you learned about leadership through that season?
Oh, that was tough because you come in as sort of in that organisation. It wasn't a massive organisation, but you come in as probably one of the last employees in the group, and then all of a sudden you're accelerated over other staff to this role. So you're managing the relationship with the prior managing director at the time, who was just sitting to the side. So you're trying to manage that whole dynamic and trying to give them purpose, knowing that they're quite happy if you fail in any which way, and you usually became the venting point. But equally at the same time, you had to be the leader yourself and project that to all the other staff. So you had to then all of a sudden be their leader, and they're looking at you for all the answers and directions. But at the same time, you're still trying to learn from the person sitting across from you who no longer is reporting to you, and you're reporting to them. So it's a really interesting. I think one of the learnings I tried to take away from that was to learn to listen to people and to try and realize that it was okay not to have all the answers. But one of the ways to be successful was to try and create an environment where others felt really engaged and empowered, because I knew, and it became a lot, you think you know all the answers, you don't know all the answers, and you can't do everything, and you're only going to be as good as the relationships and the performance that you can get out of the people that you're working with or are working with you on these journeys. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges. I think the other one is I had a big eye opener on a board. Never let a board move someone sideways on you. You've really got to. They need to step up and set some real boundaries, and if they want to make that hard change, make that. So I learned a lot about working with boards and the need to have the board have clarity and ensure that your role was supported so that you could do what you needed to, because everyone was looking for you to have that. You needed to have a very clear line of who was responsible for what and accountable.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so challenging with boards because, when you're getting a role like that, you're getting excited. You're like, wow, this is going to be amazing, and it may not be your first thought to really push back or to clarify. But anyone who's been through a situation like that with an unclear situation with the board will know just how it's for people who haven't led up to a board before. It's like. It's even more challenging than having a difficult leader because you've got these multiple stakeholders. You get less time with them. They, anything that's not clear, their number one job, really more than anything else, is about you being hired or fired. So you need to be super, super clear, and anything that's not clear at the start shouldn't be ignored. You really do want it. It's really worth its weight in gold to clarify if you can.
And it's a really tough thing to do when you're 26 or 28 and you've been thrust into your first job. You've sort of jumped on that opportunity. You feel, you're so excited and you've got all this trust. But really, in a lot of ways, you're pretty raw about that experience. So, these are one of those learned experiences that I think you've just got to go through. I look at it from my time. I look back very fondly at what happened and what we achieved. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would, even though I know what I walked into. But I think that creates a sense of resilience. But obviously, as you advance through time and through your career, you probably come a little bit more in tune with a board and how to work with your board and manage your board to help you do your job a lot more. And in that case, I probably needed to. And it was nothing against the prior managing director, but we worked like that for 2 years. So it was a pretty tough relationship. I probably needed them to push them and help them find an exit for that individual more gracefully earlier, and that would have probably helped their life and mine over that 2-year journey. But hindsight and experience is a wonderful thing. But
yeah.
It's a CEO and a leader's role also to really support and help their board with those difficult and challenging decisions at times too.
Yeah. What advice? Any other advice you'd give to leaders? There might be people listening who are just, they're stepping into a new role, or there's something on the horizon in the next couple of months where they'll be taking a role for the first time ever, where they will be reporting directly to a board. Any other advice you'd give about how to set some boundaries initially, and just generally anything that you've learned that's really helpful?
Yeah, look, I think boundaries. If you've got a good board, they'll understand the boundaries. I think it was explained to me once before that imagine a board and directors on a board and that as scuba divers, they they'll float across the top of the water and they'll look down at the organisation, and every now and then they'll dive down and they'll have a look inside the business, or they'll have a look in here or there. But they don't have an oxygen tank, so they'll pop back up. They can't stay down there for long. And I think that's a really good analogy but I think what leaders need to do, and particularly if you're starting out, you need to understand and respect that the board has a right, and it is their responsibility to come and ask these questions. And don't deem every question or every request to look into things a question of your ability or your performance. It's about them helping them to understand the business. And I think you need to become very measured and you need to work with your board and help them understand the business so that they can make the decisions that they need. And I think if you try and close it all up from them, then you're simply not building that collegial, collaborative relationship that you need to have with your board to progress the organisation. So when they talk about boundaries, I probably don't use that terminology. I think it's about identifying the roles that we each play in that governance structure and working within those to create the best team between a board and a leader or CEO to manage and drive the organisation forward. Obviously, the more experienced the board, they understand governance to management. Some boards tend to be very operational, and I think that sometimes you've got to look at where they've come from, and maybe that's when you have to just sort of say, hang on a minute, happy for you to have a look, but you need to leave this part to me on management. The other piece, some other pieces of advice from my experience is keep your board informed, socialise with your board. If you want to have decisions made with your board, don't just drop it in a paper and present it to them cold. Socialise that discussion prior to meetings. Reach out when you send the papers out. Reach out, ask them if they've got questions. Try and preempt a lot of it before you get into the boardroom when you are requesting people to make decisions. Make sure that you're giving them relevant information. Ensure you keep the emotion out of the papers and the commentary that you're having. You need to be very clear and calm in your thoughts and when you're working with your board. And see them as a colleague. Don't see them as a judge. See them as a real colleague and someone. Your job is to enable your team and the organisation to advance and to be able to do what it needs to do. And equally, the board's role is there to do that for you. So really see them as colleagues in the journey that you're doing and build some rapport with them. It's a really important piece in my view.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. One question that comes to mind for me is, what advice would you give a leader who is really excited about a potential role that they're looking at, but is very worried about the board? So there are some big red flags. How much of stepping into a relationship where potentially the board doesn't get the scuba diving analogy and they try to live down there, or vice versa, or they're very removed? From your perspective, is that something that's manageable as a leader, or is that a watch out, don't go anywhere near it sort of situation, or somewhere in between?
No, look, I think all those things are manageable, and I think it's important to understand that boards are cyclical because they change, as does management. And one of the things to look at is why is the board at that level? If you're looking at the analogy or the example where the board is quite hands-on and looking from a very heavy operational sense, it's if you're the leader coming in, try and determine why is that the case. Is that because they didn't have the trust in the previous management? Is it the mannerisms or the characteristics of those individual board members? The key relationship is the relationship between the chair. Is it the chair that's in there? Are they acting more like a managing director than a chair? Do the analysis there, but try to understand the rationale and the reasons why. And is it that there's no real clear line of governance structure? Is there a board chart that clearly defines the parameters? Is there a good set of delegations of authority so the organisation can operate? Is there historical reasons that the organisation hasn't or management haven't managed situations that the board have felt inclined to get involved? And then look through the board as to those who you think get it and get the structure and the way it should work, and build the relationships there, and slowly interject that you're the manager, you're the leader, you want me to be accountable, you need me to be responsible, and therefore you need to let me make those decisions, and you start to build that relationship there. And obviously, if your chair is in sync with you, it's a lot easier because you work through the process of altering people. But my key there is to look at why. When you have board members who are less inclined to be engaged, a lot would say that's probably an advantage. But also have a look at that. Why that is it because they've got too much on in their life? Is it their personality? And I can think of examples where I've had both on the same board. People who are very never speak in a board meeting, others who speak constantly and try and look in. Um, and it's just learning to work with those individuals, but don't discount the one who doesn't speak much. They tend to have a lot of knowledge, and if you can get to them one-on-one at times, you really do get another insight. So I would never not take on a role for that.
Yeah,
To
okay.
answer a short question in a long way, but ask the questions why, and try and work that out, and then set about how to improve that situation.
No, I love that. I think that's a great response. I think that's really, really helpful. So, interested to know, apart from what you've already mentioned, are there any other aha moment, turning points where the penny really dropped for you in your career, where they stand out, sort of burned in your memory? Any more of those moments through the rest of your career so far that are worth sharing, Shane?
Oh, look, I've had a few of those. um, I went through a pretty significant piece of work with cycling and mountain bike and BMX for a period there, and resulted in a merger and the establishment of AusCycling. And I remember the merger piece was about a 3 year piece of work when we started the early discussions. And at that time, our board, so if you're happy to indulge me on a couple of little journeys here, but that board,
Yeah,
at the
please.
time, we weren't sure whether we were committed to that decision. And we were at one point saying, well, we're not sure that this merger is right for us. And I think equally we could have very easily gone that way. But what we did is we sat down and we looked at the business and said, what is, can we grow beyond where we are? Can we become more relevant? Can we provide better? Are we, at a point where we need a catalyst to grow, and the merger became a catalyst? Where I'm going with this is that that was a really interesting discussion, because the board was of a view, well, whatever the CEO says is where we need, or, there was a very strong indication that wherever the CEO said we needed to go. And we were quite resistant. And then I came to a meeting and I remember saying, like anything, there's no guarantees, but I think I've looked at where we are and looked at our longer term future and where we can be, and we will be far better through this merger because of X, Y, Z. And it was really quite interesting to see the whole shift in the board. Went, okay, we can now see that. And I think as a leader, that they're one of those moments where, there's this sense of, just respect that they honestly believe in your view and where you're going, and that you're able to shift the board. And then ultimately the board got behind that decision, and the merger progressed. There was that one. There was other ones where we were sitting there faced at one point in an organisation, and we looked at an example of, do we roll ourselves up and just sort of wither, or do we really take on a challenge? And what I've found is that boards, like anyone, are looking for that leader, and they're looking for the leader within the board, but they're also looking for the leader within the organisation. And as CEO or a leader in a business, you need to be able to have the ambition and the belief in yourself that you can progress, and that you can make a change, and that you're open to opportunities as that presents. And I think that's a really important point. You have to be open. I haven't really given you an example
That's all
exactly
right.
here, but what I'm trying to say is that um, when I think back, there's been so many, but a lot of it's about just having a belief and a trust in yourself. And you can't be so close-minded. I
Yeah.
remember. I'll give you one. We sat there with Oz Cycling, and I remember going around and we were presenting this whole new model of what the sport could be. And people were saying, how can we vote for this? Where's your operations manual? And we had no operations manual. We had a model and we had a new framework of what could be. And people are saying, I can't vote for you to give you this organisation unless I can look at the operations manual for how this business is going to operate. And my comment back at the time was, I'll spend all this time and I'll write a 1,500-page operation manual or whatever number pages it's got. And you will read it and you will tear it apart. Or I can sell you a framework and a vision, and I can ask you to join me to build the operations manual, because that's going to be a far better organisation if you can get involved and help me build the operations of that business. So I think where I'm going with that is to say that you need to be willing to accept the help of others, understand that you don't have all the answers. Sometimes you're just trying to change one part so that others can then get involved and build the whole. And I think as leaders, that's a really important piece. That don't think you have to have every answer. Find the best people and get them to help you complete the outcome or the objective or the dream that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's really profound, actually, because it's I think one of the keys people are asking at the moment, one of the biggest questions I'm hearing in education but also across other industries, is how do you find and keep great people? And I think what you just unpacked there in how you related to the board is also so true for leading teams. It's to say to people, it's if you want to find and keep great people, then have a big vision and invite people to come in and actually help you build it together with you. And I think that's harder to do than it is to say. Like it's easier said than done. But I think if we can do that, people love. If you can actually sell the vision, if you can really get people to buy in, then you can get great people to say, you know what, I'm in. I will sacrifice a bunch of things if I can be part of building this.
Yeah, no, you're so true. And it's, the cliche is, get people to have ownership, empower people, but you've actually got to find a mechanism to activate that. And you've got to find a way for people to feel that is true and that sense of ownership. And sometimes as a leader, that means that where they take something might be a little bit, not quite where you thought it was going to be. Your role as a leader is not necessarily to then take control and lead it in another direction. You never know what they might achieve, that little slight change of direction. But what you need to be doing is keep encouraging them, keep testing the environment, keep challenging the environment so that they do feel this sense of ownership. They do problem solve their way to outcomes. And often I think you get a much better result, because the long-term sustainability and relevance of something, or deliverables of a project or a concept or anything that you're trying to do, if those people, if your colleagues and staff have been a part of really creating that outcome, then they have this real sense of pride in its long-term success. They haven't just inherited it, they've actually developed it. And I think that's a really powerful piece that needs to be there.
That's so good, Shane. Well, let's jump into Leadership Express. I've got a few questions for you. The first one is, what is a book that you've gifted to other people?
A book that I've gifted to other people. Oh, that's an interesting one. I'm about to gift, there's a new book just coming out from McKinsey called CEO Excellence. And I plan on gifting that around, because that's stories of a number of CEOs and the journeys they've been. So I'm about to gift that to a few of my staff.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. What about right now? Are you in the middle of any books, listening to any podcasts, blogs that you're reading, or just anything else you're really enjoying watching, listening, reading to right now? Listening to or reading right now?
I'm reading a book right now about what school could be, from the US, talking about the advancement of school and different methods of teaching. I don't come from an education background, so I'm trying to bring myself up to speed in this space. Listen to a lot of, I still read a lot of the the Harvard Business Review articles that come through. But that is the only book that I'm reading. I got to profess, I still spend a lot of time watching old time sport docos. I still find them very inspiring, and the stories like that. And I think you can learn leadership from anywhere.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
encourage, and so I do try to keep it pretty broad.
Yep.
What else? No, that's probably it right at the minute.
You have me intrigued about the sports docos because I love sports documentaries and sports autobiographies and biographies. Any favorite sports documentaries?
Oh, well, yeah, look, being my history in basketball, I can't help but say I haven't watched the recent Michael Jordan series twice now. But I was watching one recently about the Buffalo Bills NFL team who went to 4 Super Bowls and didn't win, and that's a pretty tough deal. But they're the resilience that created in that community as a result of that is just phenomenal. So I found that one really intriguing and really quite interesting. Um, and yeah, no, they're the two recent ones that I've watched. But the Buffalo Bills, I think it was the Fall Falls of Buffalo or something it was called.
Fantastic. I'll check that out. That I can't even imagine. Talk about resilience. Whew, that's amazing. What is a recent leadership lesson you've learned for the first time or been reminded of?
I'm constantly reminded. Look, I think the one that is the most prevalent, I think it's the one that's really relevant as a leader, is that you have to constantly be authentic and you need to be true to yourself. And you need to always maintain a sense of calmness in discussions because a lot of the times you have to deliver or you're talking about things that people can get quite emotional about, don't necessarily agree with. And one of the lessons I learned from a gentleman that I really valued was, and he'd given me a bit of a serve. This was back in my days in sport, and it was about some communication stuff, which is fine. It's interesting. Everyone hits the soft button and says communication is always the problem, and I suggest there's a sense of truth in there, but I think we need to learn about. We have to recognise are people hearing what we're saying. But where I was going with this was, we thought we'd done a great job communicating. They thought we hadn't, and I got a little bit of a lesson on that. But what that individual taught me and really made me reflect on is the comment was, don't ever not tell me what you need to tell me. Be truthful always. It's not for you to judge how I'm going to react to what you're going to tell me by shaping what you tell me. You tell me the same. You be consistent, be transparent, be authentic and honest. And how I react is not your responsibility. That is for me. But
Yeah.
if you don't tell me the truth or you're not authentic, I'm reacting to the wrong messaging. And I think that's a really important lesson as leaders. No one likes to deliver bad news. No one likes to have to be that person at times. But you've just got to make sure that you stay true to yourself, your principles, and judge that how people react is really for them, but also sympathise that, sometimes what you have to tell them is not always the most pleasant.
I love that lesson because it reminds me of a Patrick Lencioni thought, which is around what politics is in organisations and how to get rid of politics as much as possible. And sometimes the question is, well, what do we mean by politics? And Patrick Lencioni talks about politics being any time you are communicating something, say it's within a leadership team, anytime you're sitting there communicating something based on what you want to achieve, and or what you want to, what you want to see happen, and it's very, when you see that definition, you go, oh wow, there's politics everywhere, and obviously we always have some sort of it's natural to have an agenda of some sort, but the idea is, well, what if we can actually help to create organizations like you just described, where people know, you know what, just turn up and say exactly what you think, exactly how you feel, and be willing to, I love the phrase, disagree and commit. So let's actually really have it out without any sort of
Yeah.
mixed agendas, or let's really have a robust conversation or conversations about this, and then make the best decision we can. And I love
Yep.
that definition of politics, and that just what you shared really reminded me of that idea of how can I approach my boss in a way that I'm not worried about how I try to remove the responsibility from myself of how they react and just focus on telling them the facts, the truth in an authentic way.
Cool. Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think the learning is too that not only should we apply that when we're speaking to someone, but we need to be mindful of that when someone's delivering news to us. And I think I was just reflecting on what you're saying. One of the really interesting pieces as a leader, and it is okay not to have all the answers. And I know often people think, well, I'm the leader, I need to have all the answers. You don't. And one of the real skills of being a good leader, I think, is to sit with people in a forum, in a room, around a table, around a coffee, and try and get them to discuss and to try and draw the answers out from them by just prompting the discussion. And I think that's probably one of those unsaid skills of leadership, is to try and draw outcomes out of others by just prompting the discussion. And whilst you're not
Yes.
the voice in the room that's the loudest, you're actually getting the outcome by creating other voices much louder than yours.
Yeah, and that's why, what you mentioned there is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about accountability and calling people on poor behavior, because it's one thing when you have that loud person in the room that everyone needs to walk on eggshells around, because they do not handle, they aren't able to do the things we've talked about here, and it's easy to avoid dealing with them because they're often really difficult people to have to hold accountable. And as the leader, sometimes you think, I can't go there today, I just need to get to the end of this meeting, to the end of this outcome. But the problem is that people, when you have someone like that in the room and you don't call them, you're willing to walk past that behavior, I feel like it also
Yep.
stifles so much of that, because then you know what it's like. Every time people go to say something, they're in the corner of their eye, they're thinking, oh, how do I need to be a bit careful with how I say this because of
I know.
Bob. And it's like, well, actually, we need to do something about that. And not just because it's for Bob's best and for the team's best, but because you're creating, by allowing that behavior, you are actually creating and allowing politics in your team.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, as we return to work from hybrid modes and things like that, which, I believe hybrid work arrangements will continue for many years. And I think that's a good thing. But I do think that if those behaviours are allowed to occur, that you'll see people avoid the office. And that's a lot for those reasons. And that's the last thing that you want occurring as an employer.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like the shadow, the dark side of remote work is how do we, it's a part of life. We need to embrace it, and we need to understand that different. You don't want people avoiding work because they're avoiding that, being around that person, or there's lots of. It's not as black and white and as simple as everyone should be able to work from home. Hooray! It's great. It's nuanced. And we need to.
Yeah.
I think over the coming years that'll be a big challenge actually for leaders. Well, just keeping my eye
No,
on the clock, and this has been so much fun, Shane. We could keep going, but let me ask you one more question.
yeah, no, it's been sure.
If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say to them?
Learn to listen. Really, I think one of the really key things as a leader is to try and learn to listen, and by that I mean really hear what the problem and the challenge is. Don't just hear the noise. Try and actually understand what you're hearing, because often there's something else that is inside there. If you've got some challenges, and trying to find the root of the problem by listening, I think is a really important skill. The other piece is to ensure you remain, and I've used two here, but keep perspective. Really try and keep perspective about your role, and the role of others and what you're all trying to achieve. because I think that helps to keep your mind on the task, but it also helps to keep, make sure that you keep some fun in what you're doing. It's got to be fun. And so I really encourage people to keep perspective in whatever that they're doing, relevant to what they're doing, because it is important that there's balance in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really great thoughts there, Shane. So as we draw to a close, for people who've really enjoyed hearing your perspective and interested even in PMSA, they might be on the other side of the world and just interested in what you're doing in education over here, where can people find you and PMSA online?
Okay, so we're at PMSA schools.edu. You've got me now. PMSA.edu.au. You can get me at Coppin at PMSA-schools.edu.au. And I'm more than happy for anyone to reach out if they've got any questions or would like a chat or anything like that. I very much believe I had a lot of people who helped me in my career, and if I can be of any help to anyone, I'm more than happy to do that in return.
Wonderful. Well, it's been so much fun chatting with Shane today. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. This has been a great episode. I've really enjoyed it. Don't forget, for our listeners, I also have the John O. White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, two other places you can go to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Shane, for being so generous with your time and just sharing some great stories and wonderful leadership wisdom. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.